All right, today we're jumping into a story that has all the makings of a small town political thriller. It's called the South Gippsland Connection, and it really makes you ask one very tricky question. And that question is this: is what happened here illegal? I mean, you've got a candidate using his own newspaper to promote himself and his allies during an election. Ethically, yeah, it feels pretty questionable. But did it actually break any laws? So, what are we talking about here? It's a mix of three things that, let's be honest, probably shouldn't be mixed. You've got a former mayor who wants his old job back, you've got the local newspaper he helped start, and this is all happening during a council election in a town that was desperate for a clean start after its last council was completely dismissed. Okay, so to really get what's going on, let's break down who's who in this small town drama. All right, let's lay out the facts, the stuff nobody disputes. First, you have Don Hill. He's a former mayor and he's running for council again. But he's also the co-founder and head of advertising for the local paper, the South Gippsland Voices. Now get this, right after he announces he's running, who becomes the paper's editor? His wife, Barbara Hill. And all of this is happening in a community that's just been through the ringer and is really looking for some trustworthy leadership. Okay, but this is where it gets really interesting. We're not just talking about a simple newspaper endorsement. No, what they did was something, well, a lot more organized. So, smack in the middle of the election, the South Gippsland Voices publishes this grading table. Think of it like a report card handed out to all the voters that literally ranked every single person running for council on how skilled and suitable they were. And if you look at the table, you can see why people got upset. I mean, it wasn't exactly subtle. Don Hill and the candidates he was working with, they were labeled top picks and progressive independents. And everyone else? Well, they were just brushed off as the old guard, and, surprise, surprise, they were ranked poorly. But you have to look at the bigger picture here, right? The candidate who got the highest score literally owned the paper. The whole table was authorized by his wife. The newspaper itself had received $60,000 in government advertising money. And as if that wasn't enough, Hill had a formal deal to share campaign costs with the exact same people the paper called the top picks. It's a lot. So, as you can imagine, all of this led to some formal complaints being filed. So let's switch gears and look at the legal side of things. How does a situation this messy actually stack up against Victoria's election laws? You see, for the investigators, the question wasn't, does this look bad? It was, did any of this actually cross a legal line? What does the law in Victoria even say about something like this? Basically, the investigators had to check this against a few key legal points. Was the material properly authorized? Could it be considered legally misleading or deceptive? Were all the connections and affiliations properly disclosed? And was this basically a coordinated campaign using public resources? They had a lot to dig through. And the final verdict from this legal deep dive, well, it might actually surprise you. It tells us a ton about how our election laws work, and maybe more importantly, where they don't. Let's start with the biggest accusation. Was that grading table misleading? And this, right here, is the most critical legal distinction you need to understand. For something to be illegal, it has to misrepresent a fact. Just expressing an opinion, no matter how biased it is generally protected as political speech. And this is exactly where we get into that legal gray area. See, the law is there to stop people from lying about hard facts, like, say, claiming a candidate has a PhD when they don't. But what happened here was different. The newspaper presented its totally subjective opinion as if it were an objective, factual assessment, with scores and rankings and everything. So what was the verdict on that point? Well, it falls below the threshold for legal action. The bar to prove that an opinion is legally misleading is set incredibly high by regulators. Basically, unless you can prove a voter would mistake it for pure, undisputed fact, it's usually allowed. Okay, so what about disclosure? Surely they had to tell everyone that the guy who got the A+ on the report card also owned the newspaper, right? Well, this is where things get really tricky. The law is super clear that you need to disclose connections on official campaign material, like a pamphlet or an ad. But the rules get a whole lot fuzzier when that same message is dressed up as independent journalism. And that, right there, is the loophole. By publishing this grading table as editorial content from a newspaper, it basically sidestepped the tougher disclosure rules that would apply if it were just a straight-up political ad. It's like the format itself acted as a kind of legal shield.
So, when you lay it all out and look at the bottom line, a really clear pattern emerges. Across every single point, from authorization to misleading content to how funds were used, the whole thing just fell into this legal gray zone. It was ethically questionable, sure, but it was either technically lawful or the bar to prove it was illegal was just way too high.
And that brings us to the most important question of all. If no laws were clearly broken, then why does any of this matter? Why are we even talking about it? Because this case shines a massive spotlight on a huge blind spot in our system. This quote from the analysis just hits the nail on the head. This case demonstrates a governance gap, not necessarily unlawful conduct. See, the problem here isn't just one rogue candidate. The real problem is with the rules themselves. Here's the fundamental issue, right? We're using 20th century rules designed for newspaper ads and TV commercials, to handle 21st century methods of influence. The old rules are all about stopping factual lies in formal ads. The new reality? You have candidates who own the media platforms, and they can shape public perception in real time by dressing up their opinions to look like objective analysis. So if the rulebook is stuck in the past, what do we do about it? How do we fix it? Well, let's talk about a few specific reforms that are designed to close this exact kind of loophole. Here are 4 really practical ideas. 1, mandatory disclosure. If a candidate owns or controls a publication, it needs to be stated clearly right up front. 2, let's legally define independence. Create a clear test for whether editorial content is actually independent or just a campaign message in disguise. 3, regulate this kind of evaluative content. If you're going to publish a ranking table, you have to disclose your methodology. And finally, number 4, give regulators the power to make rulings during an election, not months later when it's already over and the damage is done. You know, this whole case wasn't really just about one local election. It's a preview of what could become much more common. A future where the lines between being a candidate, a campaigner, and a media owner just completely blur together. And that leaves us with one last really crucial question to think about. When our rules fall this far behind reality, what happens to our trust in the whole process?